Okay. So today I was wondering if we can take it a little bit back to the basics, and I wanted to ask you mostly questions about Saturn, if that's possible.
Sure. That's more basic than other stuff that we've been doing.
Well, I wanted to know more about Saturn conjunctions and debilitation points, and
Sure.
because there's just so much fear factor involved with the Saturn business.
Let's do it.
Okay. So the first question I wanted to ask you was, can you explain the dynamic of Saturn and Mars conjunctions, or the aspect of these two planets? Because one is about push, it seems, and another one's about pulling. So there's a lot of conflict, it seems.
One as well. So, well, you think that, I see. So you think there's a lot of conflict in a Saturn-Mars conjunction. One is about push and the other is about pull. Which one is push? Which one is pull?
I feel like, Mars is about inceptivity, so it wants to go. And
Yeah.
Saturn is about forbearance and patience and wait a minute.
Also, it pulls you
So,
back.
yeah.
Right. So Mars is like pushing you forward and Saturn is like pulling back.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the main thing about so, all right. Basics. There's no such thing as basics.
No.
Because as soon as you talk about even colors, you're gonna have to talk about so many. What kind of blue, what kind of green. So there is no basics. But when you talk about a planet, you have to also bear in mind that the planet is not just the planet. The planet is also a lord of certain houses. The planet is also in a certain sign with a certain dignity as a result, etc. So there's going to be modifications, therefore, to what the planet by itself indicates. But talking about the planets by themselves, isolating them for the sake of understanding the astrological theory, you got to remember one thing is that Saturn and Mars are the two malefics. Like really, we say there's 9 planets, 3 of them benefic, 3 malefic, and 3 neutral. Or at least that's what Paul says. But really, the three malefics are Mars, Saturn, and the Sun is not really malefic. It's just sort of, it's not really malefic, right? And also the benefics are Venus and Jupiter and Mercury. I mean, Mercury, it's not totally benefic. It's kind of benefic. So really the 2 major benefics are Jupiter and Venus, and the 2 major malefics are Mars and Saturn. So if you have a conjunction of these 2 major malefics, you got a malefic conjunction.
Yes.
That's the basic nature of the thing. So then you want to understand, what does the word malefic mean in the first place? Does that mean horrible? Maleficent? Right? There was a movie named Maleficent, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it doesn't really mean horrible. That's not, malefic is sort of a bad word. This is why actually the Sun is included amongst the malefics, because it doesn't mean horrible. It means tough, which isn't the same as horrible. Tough means really strong and strong and powerful and tough, hard. Benefics are soft by nature, soft, generous, giving, forgiving. Malefics are tough, hard, punishing. So maybe if the lordships of the planets are good, if the dignities of the planets are good, maybe this Mars and Saturn conjunction is in Capricorn. Both of the planets will be in great dignity. So maybe that gives tons of strength, toughness, discipline, strength to the person. But generally speaking, in isolation, the combination of Mars and Saturn together indicates, well, this is where life is tough. This indicates an area where life is tough, and that's trying to teach you a lesson. It's trying to punish you for something. It's not forgiving you about something or giving you a reward. And then what you're saying about push and pull, it's also interesting because, yes, Saturn is enduring, Mars is explosive. Saturn is forbearing, Mars is attacking. Mars is aggressive. Saturn is determined. It's slightly different. So it's Mars and Saturn. It's just mainly what you get from Mars and Saturn is, here's a trouble point.
I see.
Here's a trouble point. because we got our two malefics conjoining here.
From your experience of doing chart analysis, how does this conjunction, how have you seen it kind of manifest as people's experience? What kind of troubles does it make, or what kind of hardship does it bring about?
Yeah, well, it depends on what house it's in. That's your first question. If the Mars and Saturn conjunction is in the first house, then they probably have physical problems. If it's in the second house, then they probably had an unloving family, a really overly strict family, disciplinarian family. If it, in the third house, it might be great. This is an example. They may be super strong. They may be real athletic. They may have really lots of muscle and discipline and willpower and everything, bravery, because malefic planets do good in the third house. So it's not like Mars and Saturn's conjunction is always bad. In some houses, it'll be good. In some signs, it'll be good. Even if it's in the first house, but if it's in Capricorn, then it doesn't indicate bad health. It indicates tons of longevity and like enduring strength.
I see.
But, you know, isolating it from the sign and just putting it in the houses, if it's in the fourth house, then it's like the mothering wasn't there. There was a problem with mothering, or some emotional equivalent of mothering, where the person doesn't really understand how to love. They just understand rules and discipline, but they're drawing a blank on comprehending devotion and love and softness. Mars and Saturn in the fourth house. Mars and Saturn in the fifth house is double-edged. Mars and Saturn in the fifth house is very, very smart, because both Mars and Saturn can give a lot of logical support to logic. Very, very smart, very, very good with following instructions and patterns and recognizing patterns and everything, but not so good at expressing affections. So troubles with, again, Mars in fifth house, where it gives a blessing, like in the third, it gives intelligence, but where it indicates a challenge is like as it was in the fourth house. So that's sort of interesting. Mars and Saturn in the third house indicates like a blessing with strength. Mars and Saturn in the fourth house indicates a challenge with love. Mars and Saturn in the fifth house has got both. A blessing with strength, especially intellectual strength, but a challenge with love. Mars and Saturn in the sixth house is really good, again, like in the third, because malefics do good in the sixth.
I see. Okay.
And so on. And they told two friends, and they told two friends.
Yes.
Right? So you just take your symbol, and then you mix it with the other symbol that it's in. And then you mix it with the other symbol that it's in, because it's not just in the house, it's in a sign. And then you mix it with another symbol that it's in. It's not just in a house and a sign, it also owns certain houses. Right? So if, let's see, if Capricorn rises, then Mars is the fourth lord, and Saturn is the first lord. So if they conjoin, that makes a Raja Yoga, because the first lord is the Kona and the fourth lord is the Kendra. So Mars, people who have the ascendants of malefic planets are better insulated against malefic combinations in their chart, because they have a malefic ascendant, so something good comes out of it. They're better able to deal with toughness, because they themselves understand toughness. They understand discipline, they understand strength, grit, hardness. So with a Capricorn ascendant, a Mars and Saturn conjunction is a lot easier than with a Cancer ascendant. Or maybe that would also make a Raja Yoga Cancer ascendant. But then it's interesting, because Mars will debilitate in Cancer Lagna. But you know, you get the point of what I'm saying. Not every ascendant is even the same for a Mars-Saturn conjunction, because that indicates that these planets own different houses. And that also is a part of the mix of what this conjunction means.
Makes sense.
So now somebody is going to comment on the video and say, give me the exact details of their Saturn-Mars thing, right?
Yes.
Well, I have Saturn-Mars conjoined in Aquarius, the sixth house, with a conjunction from such and such and an aspect from such and such. What does it mean? But it's like you're just giving me more and more and more information, but You don't get the point. The point is actually not that I need more information, but I need all the information. I need the chart. You need the chart to interpret what it means to you. Otherwise, it's just an exercise of going more and more into theory. So why go so far into theory? Just understand the basic theory and then apply it chart by chart.
Can I expand this question and understanding conjunctions a little bit better? So let's say we have this Saturn and Mars, but they're sitting in different houses, but very close in degrees. Are they still considered a conjunction, or do we read it as just separate planet placements within the chart?
You have to still consider it conjunct.
You still have to consider.
Yeah, definitely, from my experience. However, it's not going to give a clear impact on one house or another. So that gets taken out of the picture.
I see.
Yeah. But without a doubt, like if you have Saturn at 29 degrees of one sign and Mars at 1 degree of the next sign, you got a Mars-Saturn conjunction. It's just that now it's straddling two houses in a whole sign house system.
Okay. So would they affect both houses or just?
They affect both houses, but it's kind of like it's not such a clear effect on one house.
I see.
Yeah, see, this is the thing too. You gotta, if somebody wishes that they had videos or books that would tell them all the interpretations of every possible combination, you'll never find that. Because it's not possible. It's just impossible. It's like asking for all the possible combinations of numbers. There's infinite. So better what to do to understand astrology is to understand how to combine things, not just specific combinations. You understand the principle of this symbol combines with that symbol. How do I interpret the combination of symbols? And then you got everything unlocked. You can interpret anything. Okay, well, this one is not clearly in one house or the other. Therefore, just go with it like that. Well, this conjunction doesn't clearly affect one house or the other. Maybe it affects both, but not as strongly. Maybe it affects both a little bit. Maybe I shouldn't make the house as important a part of my interpretation.
I see. Okay.
Something like that, but it's too much like on a chart by chart basis. You have to figure out what everything means. That it's not so productive to try to say, here's what you do every time. To understand a conjunction that spans two houses.
Yes.
You're going to have to play it by ear and see what exactly that chart is saying. Yes. Maybe, for example, maybe Saturn's at 29 degrees in the second house of the whole sign house system is what I use. Most people are familiar with that who are watching the video. But let's say you got Saturn is 29 degrees in the second house, Mars is 1 degree in the third house. Maybe your ascendant is at 28 degrees. So Saturn is really sitting right on the cusp of the second house then, because the cusp of the second house in a whole sign system should be 28 degrees. So then that Mars-Saturn conjunction really affects the second house, even though Mars isn't even in the second house.
I see.
So, that's the way I organize my teaching, is teach people the principles. Like, what's a house cusp? Why is it important? What does it do? What do the houses mean? What do the planets mean? How do you combine things? And then let them go. Okay. Let them sink or swim in the pool of interpretation and intuition and figure out how to put things together on the fly. Because that's what you have to do. You can't possibly memorize every single possible chart combination.
Yes. Okay.
There's one more thing that's interesting too about the combinations. Well, what are they called? Conjunctions. You got to not only, when you do a conjunction, don't just consider the latitude degree of the zodiac, but also consider the longitude degree, which is called declination.
So how would you apply that to a chart?
Maybe your Saturn and Mars are on the same degree. So you're like, oh my God, this is an exact Saturn-Mars conjunction. Doesn't get any stronger than this. But maybe Saturn is at like as far south as it ever gets of the ecliptic, and Mars is as far north as it ever gets of the ecliptic. So they're actually separated by quite a bit of space. But if you look at it just on the horizontal measurement, which is what the zodiac does, you don't see that. But classic texts, East and West, say that with aspects, we don't care. They're far away, so that importance goes away. But with conjunctions, the north and southness of the planet is also important. If the planets are in the same north and south, that also puts them closer together. The closer together they literally get, the more the conjunction is intense, for better or for worse.
Now, if we have, while we're still on the topic of conjunction, let's say we have Saturn on one side of the house at 1 degrees and then Mars is at 25 degrees. They're still affecting that house, but should we interpret it in terms of them having some sort of an effect on each other still, or just scratch that?
Yeah, they have an effect on each other for sure.
Okay.
It's not like there's concrete walls between the signs, right? You can't even see the signs. Even the nakshatras, you can't see the borders between nakshatras. You can't see the borders between signs. It's not like there's concrete walls between them.
Yes.
Even if there's walls between things, you can hear what's on the other side of the wall, right? Actually, in the math that I do for considering a conjunction between planets, I do put a penalty in if there's a border. So like, for example, if a planet is 5 degrees away from another planet, I think the way that I do my math is if you're 15 degrees apart, if the two planets are 15 degrees apart, the conjunction is inconsequential. 15 or more degrees apart. I think it may be that, or I have to check my formulas and everything. It might be 30 degrees. But after a certain point, it's inconsequential. And then the closer you get together, the more power the conjunction gets. And so you figured out mathematically how much power the conjunction has. But what I do is I say, but if there's an important border in between them, like the border of Varashi, then you have to detract some points. You give it penalties, subtract some of the potency from it. There is some kind of a bump or a border between signs. There's something in between signs, but it's not like a lead radioactive proof, bulletproof wall. It's a permeable membrane between the two signs. So if they're like 10 degrees apart, but in different signs, that's not really a conjunction. But if they're 10 degrees apart in the same sign, that's a conjunction. If they're 5 degrees apart in two different signs, then you should consider it a conjunction, because that's pretty close. Even if they're not in the same sign. The penalty of the border wouldn't be enough to, sorry, I keep cutting you off. The penalty of the border wouldn't be enough to detract everything from the potency of that conjunction.
That makes sense.
Go ahead, your turn.
Okay, thank you. So I was wondering, so let's say we have Saturn and Mars in the first house, right?
Yeah.
And they're making their aspect, the seventh aspect to the seventh house. Would they have some sort of interaction that's melting and mixing of their dynamic in the seventh house, or are they affecting the seventh house separately?
We have to see if they can actually affect the seventh house. So this is what the house cusp is important for. Cusp meaning the important point of the defining point of the house is what the cusp is literally. So some people say that it's the beginning of the house. Some people say that it's the middle of the house. I say that it's the middle of the house, which is in a whole sign system is a little inconsequential. It's the ascendant's degree. That's what I say. I'm not the only one who says it, but that's the school of thought that I belong to about cusps. The ascendant degree specifies the cusp of every single house. So if your ascendant is 28 degrees Capricorn, then 28 degrees Aquarius is the most sensitive point in your second house. 28 degrees Pisces is the most sensitive point in your third house. 28 degrees Aries is the most sensitive point in your fourth house. Right? Because your ascendant is 28 degrees Capricorn. If it's 5 degrees Capricorn, then 5 degrees Aquarius is the most sensitive point in your second. So the house cusp is the thing that receives aspects and conjunctions even. So if you got Mars and Saturn at a degree in your first house, that lines up with the ascendant, then they'll aspect if it lines up with the ascendant or is before the ascendant. Before meaning like rows before the ascendant is a lower degree than the ascendant. Then they'll aspect the 7th house cusp, and you'll get also the effect of having a Mars-Saturn conjunction, affecting your 7th house too.
I see.
But if they're far away from the ascendant or after, even just a little bit after the ascendant, because planets don't aspect the 6th house, 150 degrees. So if it gets past the ascendant point, then the 7th house cusp moves towards the 6th house, moves towards 150 degrees, and the aspect disappears quickly.
I see. Okay.
Do you see? Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, the conjunction of planets in one place causes a conjoined aspect on another place. But if that place is important or not, you have to consider.
I see.
Maybe I got maybe I got the sunlight with a magnifying glass on one point, but if it's going nowhere, then it doesn't do anything. But if it's hitting like this little piece of tissue or dry leaf, then it can start a fire. So similarly, by having a conjunction of planets, you're going to have some magnified sunbeam come out, some magnified beam of drishti, of aspect. But is it going to do anything? Depends on whether or not that aspect falls on something. I mean, if it falls on another planet, or if it falls on a house cusp, then it's significant.
Makes sense. And this question perhaps it should be clear to me, but I wanted to know, let's say it meets all the criteria of having that aspect. Would the conjunctions affect or the dynamic be stronger in the actual house where the planets are sitting or in the aspecting house? Would they have the same kind of strength there or no?
That's a good question. I consider it to be equal.
Equal.
If a conjunction is at 100% or if an aspect is at 100%, I think they're equal importance.
Okay. Makes sense. So I wanted to also ask you similar question about the conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter.
Yeah.
But
Can I say one more thing that's interesting?
yes, of course.
About the aspects, the combined aspects. So sometimes you can get a combined aspect without getting a conjunction. You can get a conjoined aspect without getting a planetary conjunction. So that you should also look for that. That's significant. For example, since we're on Mars and Saturn, if you got Saturn in the 1st house, it's going to aspect the 10th house, right?
Yes.
Saturn has a heavy aspect on the 10th house. If you have Mars in the 7th house, it's also going to aspect the 10th house.
Yes.
So there you're going to wind up, now if their degrees line up, Saturn and Mars are at degrees that line up, then they're going to have a combined aspect on the 10th house. So you'll get like a Saturn-Mars conjunction in the 10th house by virtue of their aspects both falling on the same point.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Yes.
And that can happen in other ways, many other ways. Okay. So now you wanted to talk about Saturn and Jupiter?
Yes. I guess everything that you talked about in terms of just interpreting the symbolism of them and not get too theoretical and details and nitty-gritties, but just in general, Saturn and Jupiter conjunction, because Jupiter is about expansion, Saturn again is about limitation. So how should we approach this dynamic?
Yeah, so it's confusing because is it a clash or not? Right? Remember I said that what you really want to learn is how do you interpret symbols. And the way that you interpret symbols is to say, is this a clash of the symbolism or are they saying the same thing? Or is there nothing in common? And there's nothing in common, then you just don't care. You know, like this planet is about love and this other planet is about logic. It's not a clash necessarily. It's not the same thing necessarily. It's just two different things. So there's nothing special happening there. But if this planet is about love and partnership and the other planet is about individuality and freedom, there's a direct clash. So something important is there. Or similarly, if one planet is about love and partnership and the other is about friendship and exchanges, there's a direct synergy. They're talking about the same thing. So that's important. So Jupiter and Saturn, they seem to present, one is negativity and restriction and the other is positivity and growth. Jupiter is positivity and growth. Saturn is negativity and restriction. So it seems like they're right on that same opposite page. There's a big clash. So usually when you have a clash, the interpretation is, here's a challenge, it's a clash. This is a challenging, this interpretation indicates a challenge. And when you have things that are synergistic, that interpretation should indicate something that's really good or synergistic in the person's life. Right, so we're inclined to say, well, Jupiter, Saturn conjunctions should be problematic because they clash.
Yes.
However, there's a lot of similarity between Jupiter and Saturn also. You know, because they both are the final two planets in the classic astrology. So they all represent the stage of that spiritual evolution, which happens after you get out, after you get all the way out into your body. You know, the sun is the consciousness itself, the moon is the mind. It reflects into a mind. Then it tries to understand the world through Mercury, becomes intellect. Then it wants to interact with the world and partner with it through Venus. But then it wants to conquer the world through Mars and have strength in a physical form. But then it starts to revert at that point. And it thinks like, conquering the world just causes problems. Isn't there a better way? Can we cooperate? Can we move back towards Venus again? Can we move back towards cooperation? And Jupiter is like a blend of Mars and Venus. It's like, yeah, you can get what you want through cooperation. You can get what you want through following rules and morals and religions and philosophies. So Jupiter starts to take us. See, and the whole movement from the sun to Mars is like extroverted. It's all going on a Rahu path, moving outward. After reaching Mars, the planets start to signify Ketu's inwardness. So Jupiter is starting to revert the soul back towards its original nature and saying, no, you'll get better happiness and enjoyment if you follow the Venus principle of love and stuff. If you follow more, and then Saturn follows up on it, saying, look, you'll get better happiness and fulfillment if you just give up on all this crap. You think that there's that you're going to get happiness and fulfillment in all the wrong places. You're putting yourself into all these temporary things. Saturn's showing you how temporary everything is, and how it's all going to fail you. Everything's going to fail you. Give up on this stuff. Right? So Saturn and Jupiter are both trying to like reform our consciousness. That's their basic nature, but they both have that, they have that positive and negative flavor to it. Saturn is like a harsh teacher that's pointing out, like, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. And Jupiter is like the encouraging teacher, like, you did this good. Keep doing that, you know, do that more, do more of that, do less of that other thing, but do more of this. So Jupiter is like an encouraging teacher. Saturn is like a discouraging teacher, but they're both teachers. So the combination of Jupiter and Saturn has some synergy also. It's not just the clash. It's a clash between the positivity and the negativity, but it's a synergy between trying to bring a person to a higher way of seeing life, a broader picture of life, just a deeper, a higher way of considering personal happiness. So Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions make people philosophical. Or they, you know, it's really wrong to say make. Because planets don't make, but they indicate. So Jupiter-Saturn's conjunctions indicate really philosophical people, people that are really interested in going to a deeper or higher, broader level of thinking about life, thinking about the basic stuff in life. Like, how do I be happy? So they, you know, classics say a lot of things like, here you get gurus. When you get Jupiter aspecting Saturn, mutual aspect Jupiter and Saturn is a guru. Because this person is deep. Guru means deep, heavy, big, significant. So here you get a significant person that's deep with a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. But the clash between positivity and negativity, it's like this person is going to be clashing with conventional concepts. Saturn and Jupiter, right? Saturn is critical and finding flaws. Jupiter is faithful and accepting. So Saturn and Jupiter is a clash between that. The person is going to try to accept some religious doctrine or try to accept some teacher or a guru, and then later on realize I was just being naive, and then they're going to try to go against it. There's this clash. They're going to have to break through the prepackaged concepts of what's good and what's bad, of what's ideal and what's less than ideal, because they're going to have to try to get to this deeper, broader level. So it indicates both at the same time. And that's when you get your good interpretation, when you figure out how the clash and the synergy work together.
Yes.
So they produce the clash of like not being able to trust in the teachers, Jupiter, Saturn, and not being able to trust teachers, finding mistakes even in sources of wisdom. But the whole purpose of it is to go deeper, to get, so it's a very deep person, but it's a person who's quite critical, and sometimes is going to run into problems, therefore, with the sources of their guidance.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, another interesting thing about conjunctions, too,
Yes.
is since the signs are so heavily characterized just by their planetary ruler, if you want to know the interpretation of a conjunction between planets, like let's say Jupiter and Saturn, just think about the interpretations of Jupiter and Saturn signs, or Saturn and Jupiter signs, especially mula trikona, especially the planets like root sign, most important sign. So like Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions are a lot like Jupiter in Aquarius and Saturn in Sagittarius.
Yes.
Not Jupiter and Capricorn. Capricorn is not the root sign. So it's not like it's a big bad thing. Jupiter and Capricorn. Jupiter Saturn conjunction.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. This next question, I was looking at a bunch of charts. You know who Tony Hawk is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know who
So,
Tony Hawk is.
yes, everyone does. So I was really surprised to see that he has a debilitated Saturn because it's sitting in Aries, right? And my image of a debilitated Saturn was always someone who has a lot of fear. But then I don't know if whoever that stood on top of a ramp is a pretty fearful thing to look down. So I'm just wondering, how do we interpret this?
I don't know. You want to show where'd you get his birth data?
Um,
This is what I'm saying. Like, you got to look at the whole chart.
yes.
So why don't we do that?
To look at his chart right now?
You got his birth data quickly available? Want me to look it up?
Yeah, we have to look it up.
Here, let's look up. Let's pause the video so people don't have to wait while we look up all this stuff. Okay, so we found Tony Hawk's thing on the Astro data bank. He's May 12th, 1968 at 3:12 a.m. in San Diego, California. So let me calculate that now. All right, so we calculated this birth chart and plugged it into my formulas to interpret it. So here, I'll share the screen.
Thank you.
Google Chrome.
Victara has started screen share.
Is that you, or was that must
That
have
was
been
you. That was Bill Gates, I think,
What?
or Stephen Hawking. All right, so here's Tony Hawk. So here's your chart, right? Just like you said, he's got Saturn in Aries, and look, it's like very close to Rahu, and it's in the second house. And Saturn is the 12th and the 11th lord because he's a Pisces ascendant, with Jupiter in the 6th house. Interesting stuff. Second lord is in the 4th house with Gemini, the 4th lord. Venus, the 3rd lord, is in the 3rd house with the sun, the 6th lord. If people know astrology, then this is already a gold mine of information. Well, one thing I want to bring to your attention right away is this. This is the calculation of the prominence of the planets. So he's mostly a Jupiter. The main interpretations of his chart have to come from Jupiter. Saturn's the least prominent planet in his chart. So that's one pitfall that people will fall into. They just happen to be investigating Saturn and debilitated Saturns, and then they say like Tony Hawk has debilitated Saturn. Oh, how does that make sense? But Saturn's not so important in Tony Hawk's chart.
Right.
Jupiter winds up being really important in Tony Hawk's chart. Now, so Saturn in Aquarius, does it mean fearful?
Mhm.
Saturn in Aquarius means rash, not patient. Right? Not patient, not taking your time, not cautious, making
And
hasty
also
decisions.
an Aries, sorry.
I'm sorry, did I say something? I said Aquarius or something? Saturn
Yes,
in
Aries.
Aries. That happens to me a lot. I say the wrong words for things and then don't realize the name. Saturn in Aries, it doesn't indicate being fearful. It indicates being rash, impatient. Let's actually look at this. Can you still see this page?
Yes, I can.
Oh, wait, let me pause it because I don't want people to see everything, my secrets. Wait, no, I just okay, so I just paused the screen sharing. Can you still see it?
I still see recording, and I do see the screen.
All right,
Your
anyway,
screen.
you saw some of my secrets there, my secret software.
I didn't see your secret software. I just saw Google.
Oh, okay, good, you didn't see it. All right, so here we go. If we look at, now we're gonna have to scroll way down because this is if Tony Hawk got my complete chart assessment. So his Saturn is not that important, so it's gonna be, there it is, kind of buried down into the thing. So let's look and see what it says about Saturn in Aries. Feeling unnecessarily confined and restricted in any partnership, tending to be cruel, unrelenting, unforgiving, adamantly uncaring, unattached, and unconcerned. It's not fearful. It's actually quite different than fearful. This guy is not concerned with stuff. Very uncaring, unconcerned, unattached. And it also is not, I didn't mention it here, but it's rashness because you got Saturn as the planet that gives you your patience. But if you debilitate it, then you're not going to get patience. Then he's got it with Rahu, who's quite good in Aries, in the sense of giving just like power, strength, boldness, adventurousness. So this debilitated Saturn is not indicating fearfulness, but it's actually indicating that I don't care if I break my leg. I don't care. I'll try it. I don't. And then the other things that are interesting in this chart as well. First Lord is in the 6th house. 6th Lord is in the 3rd house. It's quite athletic. Second Lord, you might think, well, Saturn debilitated in the 2nd house is not so good for second house. True. It's going to make him probably come from a family that didn't really protect him that much. Let him go and freaking skateboard in this empty swimming pool in somebody's backyard. But it's not a really bad 2nd house because the 2nd Lord is in the 4th. That's ideal. The Lord of the 2nd and the 4th house is one of the best lordship combinations. Stabilizes the 2nd house with the 4th Lord. So it's not like he's got a terrible family life necessarily. He's just got one that's really adventurous, not really too attached, does a lot of moving here and there. Venus in the 3rd house has got a lot of skill. So he does a skill, like a performance sport rather than like football or something. He does a skillful sport. Yes. And the 6th Lord in the 3rd house is very strong, athletic. The Sun in the 3rd house is strong and athletic. So he's got an interesting chart. He's also got a debilitated moon in the 9th house.
Yes. And his Saturn's making that aspect to Mars, but the degrees are too far apart.
Right. This degree is very too far apart. This is almost, you want to see the aspect table?
Yes, please.
Yeah, here's your aspect table, calculation of aspects. So it's only 43% aspect from Saturn to Mars.
I see. Okay.
This is recording?
It says it's recording.
Yeah, it's recording. Right. Mostly Saturn is aspect in Ketu because it's right lined up with Rahu.
Right, yes. And his Mars is having a strong aspect to both Sun and Jupiter too, right?
No.
No.
Moon and Jupiter, but aspect to the moon is kind of negligible. It's 58%. Aspect to Jupiter is strong. So that's interesting. And people might say, what? How is this Mars aspecting this Jupiter? It's because the sign borders don't matter. The Mars is at 3 degrees of Gemini, so it's right towards the beginning of Gemini, and Jupiter is at 26 degrees of Leo, so it's right at the end of Leo. So they're just about 90 degrees apart from each other.
It's so good we have a visual, because when you were saying that earlier, I was trying to imagine it. I see it now. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so Mars is putting in a strong aspect onto Jupiter. That's also showing that he's athletic. Jupiter's in the first lord is in the 6th house, 10th lord is in the 6th house. In Leo, with Mars's aspect, and the 6th lord is in the 3rd house. The moon is also in a Mars sign. Saturn is in a Mars sign. Moon's in a Mars sign can be really rash.
Mm-hmm.
So like to do a crazy sport, like to do sports is kind of rash. To do a dangerous sport,
Yes.
very rash. So
And
he's rash, but
skateboarding.
rash in a good way.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for doing that.
That was fun. See, this is what I mean. If somebody just says, well, Tony Hawk has a debilitated Saturn, and then you just try to talk to that point, it's actually counterproductive. Like, everybody's got an individual chart. Get the birth data, look at the chart. It takes time. That's why you can't get good free information on astrology. Because you have to compensate people for the time they take to read your chart, unless you don't mind somebody who's a novice who just wants to learn by reading your chart. But in that case, you're not going to probably get that good information anyway, because he or she's not very experienced. So yeah, you have to be able to look at the whole chart really fast. Get the whole thing as a picture. See the whole thing as an overview. All right.
Yes.
What's next?
Victikara has stopped screen share.
I don't know what that is.
It's got to be your Zoom, guardian angel of Zoom, telling you what's happening, because you obviously couldn't see it.
No, should I try to turn it off or just leave it?
It's cool. It's not going to happen again. If it does happen again, we'll like lip sync to it.
Okay. I just wanted to, at this point, just move away from Saturn for a second. And I wanted to ask you a question because it happened in the transit recently. And see, on January, can I just read out my question here so
Yeah.
I don't mix it up? Okay, so on January 8th, Venus was running behind the sun, and this was happening for the past 10 months as an interior conjunction. And then on January 9th, Venus moved ahead of the sun as an exterior conjunction. Now it's going to take another few months when Venus goes retrograde and Venus falls again behind the sun, and sun is winning the race. So I wanted to know, when we look at a chart and we see these planet races, should we take that into consideration in terms of their interpretation as to who's ahead of how fast they're moving when they pass each other or retrograde and fall behind and so forth?
Yeah, you should, but the first grade student doesn't really learn multiplication. I think like second grade learns multiplication, and then they don't really learn like I don't know. You know what I'm saying? You can't learn everything at once. First, figure out what the planets mean. People don't even really clearly know what the planets mean. People don't really know what Mercury is about. People don't know what the moon is about. They have all kinds of mixed up ideas about that. First, get that all sorted out. That's the first thing you have to do. Then just learn basics, like what is the reasonable basic interpretation of planet A and sign A, planet A and sign B. Learn all that stuff, not by memorizing it, but by thinking about it and figuring it out, so that you can make sense of statements about it in valid texts by great authors, by great astrologers. Then you start to think about principles like aspects, conjunctions, yogas. What are these things all about? How do I calculate them? How do I interpret them? How do they affect?
Yes.
Then you can refine those things still further. Is this aspect applying or is it separating? Is the conjunction applying or separating, interior or exterior, right? Is it applying or separating? It makes a difference. But the difference that it makes is just, it's not really useful for a student or a person that hasn't even really grasped the more basic stuff yet. It's just going to throw another layer of junk on top of you that you have to try to sort out. You're not capable. You're not capable of sorting out. That's why people, if you get like inspired to learn about astrology, then you go out there and you get information, and then within like 53 seconds, usually you feel overwhelmed because it's like way too much overload because it's not really sorted out. Like, first learn this. Don't even ask questions about something else yet. You haven't gotten this part down yet. You know, learn about this, then go and learn about the next thing, then go about. So yeah, in applying, when things are applying, then the planet that's applying, just the basic theory is the planet that's applying is applying its symbolism to the planet that's it's gaining on. And so, or when an aspect is applying, it's intensifying the aspect. And then when it's separating, it's dispersing. The effect of that thing is going away. So it's being released from that. So for example, if you have a dispersing conjunction that was negative, then then it indicates gaining release from that conjunction. This comes into play more with transits, because you're looking at movement a lot more. Perhaps you could also look at the snapshot of the movement in the birth chart. When this person was born, there was a conjunction between Venus and the sun. Yeah, but Venus was actually applying to the sun at that point. So that means a little bit different than if it was separating. But this is like higher level. You know, now you're like really going into details about things. I think people really, unfortunately, they don't like to hear this, but they're not really ready to go into those details. I don't go into those details so much. You don't even need to go into those details so much. You know, what do you really need from astrology? Do you need some pinpoint? Do you need some pinpoint information about something from astrology? Not really. You need to be pointed in the right direction. Yes. Get your bearings straight. Astrology helps us get pointed in the right direction, get our bearings straight, understand, make more sense out of the world around us and what's happening to us. You don't need to like go into pinpointing minuscule techniques to get that out of astrology.
But could one look at that as, let's say someone is looking at the transits, but keep looking at these motions of, for example, this Venus and Sun. Could we use it as pattern recognition? Because you could go back in transits, right? And then see those positionings with any two planets, not just Venus and Sun. And then just kind of try to, I don't know, gather some data about, for instance, what this means in this person's life or how it's.
Yeah, you can do that. One interesting thing about the sun with Venus and Sun, we talked about that in a previous video that you and I did, was about whether the combustion is entering the combustion or leaving, right? Mm-hmm. Then about pattern recognition, like go back and see what happened. A lot of people advise this. A lot of astrology teachers advise to do this to understand a transit, and it's pretty valid. I might even advise myself to somebody. If you want to know what your Saturn return is going to be like, and what was your last Saturn return like, it's going to be the same. But you got to realize that the conditions that your last Saturn return happened in are totally different than the conditions that your current Saturn return happens in. So not everybody can get astrology because not everybody has an abstract mind. You have to be able to abstract it and see like, yeah, this is what happened in my last Saturn return. The essence of that. What was the essence of that? Not the specifics of it, but the essence of it. That's what's going to happen in this Saturn return too. But the essence of it is going to have different specifics because I'm in a different situation now than I was before. Yes. You know, last time I had my Saturn return, my dog died, but this time I don't even have a dog. what's the essence of my dog dying? There's some kind of a loss or something, right? That's like a little example to show you what I'm talking about.
Because when I did go back with a few planets, I do see what you're saying, even from a personal experience. And just I thought it'd be interesting as that collection of just seeing the patterns.
Yeah, it's very useful.
Yeah.
It's really useful, and it helps you understand how transits work. But if it becomes very useful when you distill the essence of the thing, rather than just don't do like data collection where you just stop with the specific data that you collect. Do data collection and then analyze the data to see what's the theme, what's the essential theme that's unifying all these things that are connected with this transit. That's what that transit is about. And it manifested as these specifics because of the other conditions that were happening at that time. At a different person, at a different time, for the same person, the same transit will manifest differently. Transits are also influenced by the dasha. What the dasha is affects what the transit's going to do.
Thank you. There are some questions here that I wanted to ask about the effect of Saturn on different elements of houses and signs. But before doing that, can you briefly kind of talk about Saturn and his great enemy Sun when they're in conjunction and they're connected in a chart?
Saturn and Sun.
Yes.
So that's like the son and the father that don't get along.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but the son is a grown man. So it's like gets aggressive or it gets ugly. Two men don't get along, it gets ugly. And then they're both like one's trying to control the other one's trying to rebel. So Saturn's relationship with the sun is so tense because Saturn is always trying to show the sun you're not all that. You're not so great. Would you get off your high horse and be a normal, down-to-earth person? And the sun is always trying to tell Saturn, you have to obey, you have to listen to me, you have to follow my authority, you shouldn't criticize me. Saturn is saying, I have a valid criticism. The sun says, no, it's not valid to criticize me. So they can't hear each other.
Okay.
So Saturn Sun conjunctions are huge conflict, huge indicators, very clear indicators of conflict with authority figures.
Oh, okay.
Conflict with authority figures and the structures that authority figures set up.
I see. Okay. Makes sense. Thank you. Next question is about Saturn being a dry planet, and what would be the effect of Saturn in the watery houses, such as 4th, 8th, or 12th, or sitting with the moon itself, for instance?
Saturn is a dry planet because it's windy and it's dry. Dry is like slimmed down, withered down, right? So Saturn is like that, of that nature. Saturn, let's talk about watery houses, watery signs. Saturn's not really so classically great in most of the water signs, like Cancer. Saturn is a real depressive interpretation in Cancer. Saturn has a real mean interpretation in Scorpio. Saturn in Pisces is okay. Mean.
Okay.
Tough. Like it just has negative experiences, negative emotions. Negative emotions also. That's what you get with Saturn in watery places.
Yes.
Negativity, dryness goes into the emotions.
Yes.
It's more, Saturn's happier in 12th house or Pisces because there's some synergy with it. Jupiter has some synergy with Saturn, and both interested in elevating us. Saturn has some synergy with the 12th house. They're both reductive, minimalistic.
And in terms of these also being considered the mokṣa houses, and Saturn's aim is the tangible, real things in the world, how would one interpret that?
Saturn's aim is the tangible, real things in the world. That's a mistake, actually. I believe that's a mistake. Venus's aim is the tangible, real things in the world. But even that is a mistake. because you have to also understand that Venus is just the tangible, real things in the world are just a token of pleasure and happiness, which is what Venus is really about: pleasure, happiness, and love. So Venus is not also necessarily just a materialistic planet. Saturn, practical things in the Saturn is practical, logical, tangible. But don't forget that Saturn is very detached. Like if Saturn gets debilitated, it gets exaggerated. They don't care. So they're not really attached to material. Saturn is not a planet that's attached to material things. So actually Saturn in the mokṣa house works well. That's something that it has going for it. That's why Saturn in the fourth, it has clashes and it has synergies. So you got to make those work together. Like Saturn in the fourth clashes with emotions because Saturn is dry. Emotions are wet. But Saturn in the fourth goes well with detachment because the fourth is a mokṣa house. So you have Saturn. The fourth is an interesting house because it's a house of devotion, affection, but also detachment. So it means that devotion and attachment is part and parcel of your detachment from yourself. Right? You say, I'm detached from what I want. I'm interested in what you want. That's devotion and attachment and affection. So Saturn's okay with a little bit okay in the fourth house in the sense that at least it gives you a sense of being able to sacrifice for others, willingness to sacrifice for others. Saturn in the eighth house, the eighth is also mokṣa. So the eighth is like finding flaws in everything. It's finding flaws, it's finding mistakes, it's finding cracks in everything in the eighth house. Saturn also likes to do that, likes to find mistakes, likes to find flaws, likes to be critical. So it can get along great in the eighth house. Saturn in the eighth house can give you a nature that's really critical, but it's also going to give you like a meanness. But that goes together, doesn't it? It's like these are ways, when you interpret the thing, you have to sit with it for a while to figure it out. This is complex. Everything is not simple. You know, the basic things are simple. Signs can be simple. Planets can be simple. You get simple understanding of the planets and signs. But as soon as you start to put things together, things get sophisticated and complicated. Not so clear cut. So, okay, Saturn in the eighth house, on one hand, it's good in this way. On one hand, it's difficult in that way. It's difficult in that it makes a person really critical, but it's good in that it makes a person really critical. It makes a person able to see the mistakes and see the flaws, but that's also going to make them a little bit mean, bitey. Be pointing out flaws and finding flaws.
I was trying to think about that the whole time when you say mean. How does it become mean? But now I see what you mean.
Well, and also Saturn in Scorpio. And Scorpio's got a stinger. Scorpio is emotional, but independent. And then you throw Saturn in the mix. Saturn, that's your first question was, how does Saturn and Mars relate? Well, this is a Mars sign. You put Saturn in the Mars sign. You're going to have that Saturn-Mars conjunction type of interpretation here too. So Saturn and Scorpio in an emotional place. It's a clash between dryness and emotion. It's getting two tough guys together, and it's both in its critical position. So it's a critical there's critical feelings that have a bite to them. That's why I say, especially Saturn and Scorpio, it's got a little pinch. It pinches people.
Yes. Makes sense. The next question is about Saturn's aspects, because it's 3rd, 7th, 10th, so it's 60 degrees, 180, and 270.
Right.
So can you explain for us do they hold a significant meaning at 60 degrees and then at 180 degrees?
Yeah, I'll do this. This will be our last question then, right? Okay, every planet has a full aspect at 180 degrees.
Yes.
And every planet, there's a certain thing. Every planet has full to 180 degrees, 3/4 to 90 and 210, 4th and 8th positions. let's get rid of these big numbers, degrees. Let's talk about how, signs from. We'll use shorthand for the degrees and signs from. Every planet looks at the 7th house, sees it clearly. Every planet has 3/4 view on the 4th and the 8th. Every planet has half a view on 5 and 9. And every planet has 1/4 of a view on 3 and 10. So therefore, every planet has 0 view, is blind to 11, 12, its own sign, but there can make conjunctions, and 2 and 6. So that's the full map of how planets aspect the other places. The outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, have a better view. So they get increased ability to see, because the aspect is you're putting your eye on something, influencing it by your vision. So Mars gets the least amount of improvement because it's the closest to the Earth. It takes the ones that every planet usually sees at 75%, 3/4, and it boosts those to 100%. So Mars can see the 4th house, 90 degrees, the 7th house, 180 degrees, and the 8th house, 210 degrees. Jupiter, the next one, gets an even bigger boost. It's a little further out, it gets a bigger boost. It can see 5 and 9, planets where most people can only see half power. Jupiter can see that at full power. And then Saturn gets the biggest boost of all because it's the furthest out. It takes 3 and 10, where most planets can only see at 1/4 clarity. Saturn can see full clarity on 3 and 10. So it's got like 75% more than normal aspect on 3 and 10.
Yes, okay.
So it's because of how far out they are from the Earth, how much of an improvement they get on their ability to look at stuff.
I see, okay.
And the interesting thing then is that Jupiter aspects trines, and so trine have a nature of being benefic aspects. As astrology developed later, they started to just say, well, any planet making a trine is having like a Jupiterian effect, benefic effect. And Saturn and Mars, they have the right angle. That's because they're strong. They're malefics. Right angles are strong. Mars looks at 90 degrees square, and Saturn looks at 270 square. And so as astrology developed, they said, well, the square aspect has that nature of malefic planet, like Saturn and Mars. So in modern astrology, they say square aspects are difficult, benefic aspects are helpful. Trine aspects are helpful.
And the 7th aspect, I know in Western astrology, that's considered an opposition, so it's difficult. Do we interpret that in the same way too? Or?
I think the original concept of the opposition was difficult but necessary, difficult but irresistible.
Difficult, okay.
You know, it's where the other thing has what you lack. So it's very confusing. It's difficult to understand the other thing,
Yes.
but it's what you need. It has what you lack. So oppositions are very magnetic.
Okay.
They pull you into it. But every planet has a 180. In Vedic astrology, which is Vedic astrology has preserved the oldest form, some of the oldest forms of astrology, because Indian culture just preserves things. And in that system, every planet can see 180 degrees apart, which just shows that like this is the most obvious, this is the magnetic pull. This is where you really affect each other.
Yes.
You have a strong effect on each other.
Okay. I understand. Thank you so much. We were so much more serious today talking about Saturn.
Really?
No?
Yeah? I thought we told some good jokes today.
No, definitely. Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Okay, Parisa, thank you. See you next week.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.